Darkcast Network. Out of the shadows come the best indie podcasts.
Hi, I'm Ashley, a true crime fanatic.
I'm Dan, and I don't know anything about true crime.
Together, we host Fuck That, a true crime podcast that covers cases that highlight important topics that are often overlooked, such as wrongful convictions, domestic violence, and social inequities, sprinkled in with the occasional case with spooky themes. If you are looking for your next true crime fix delivered candidly with a hint of sarcasm, you can listen and subscribe to bi-weekly episodes of Fuck That wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to give us a follow on Facebook and Twitter at @FThatPod and at @FThat_pod on Instagram.
Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Hey y'all, welcome back to Mountain Murders. I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Dylan, this is episode 517.
What?
Can you believe that?
We just blew past 500.
I know, we didn't even really have a big celebratory 500th episode.
That's because we're going to wait till the 5,000th.
Okay, sounds like a plan. How you doing?
We'll be like 75 in podcasting. That'd be awesome.
Might run out of cases by then.
Oh, no, Lord, no. I'm doing pretty good. Just trying to survive the current economic conditions. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm hanging in there. Of course, still battling whatever funk is lingering around for weeks now.
Oh, my God. Maybe you're just perma-snotty now.
Yeah, I don't know. My lungs just seem like they're not going to be happy ever again.
What if this is your life? This is just how it is.
Well, this is how my life is. This has been like this for a month. Between that and the cold-ass weather, yeah, I'm hanging in there.
Sure, Lord, the weather's broke a little bit. Thank goodness for that. And I got to say, I've said it before, I'm ready for spring.
Man, it needs to get here sooner than later.
I'm ready for spring allergies. I can't lie.
You ready for spring? Great. I can just go from being like bronchial and snotty to like snotty. Yeah.
Well,
awesome.
You know, it seems like people that are snotty because of allergies are just like, well, it's just my allergies. So, you know, maybe it'll make you feel a little bit better.
Thanks. You know, Dylan, last week we had a discussion about my struggles with math. And I had quite a few folks send us an email or a message to let us know that they also struggle with math.
Yeah, it's funny sometimes, you know.
It's like a universal, there's a universal hatred of math.
Yeah, we get, we talk about whatevs here, personal life here on the pod because we love our listeners. You're our friends. But it's funny what resonates sometimes, you know, when you really get a really strong reaction from the listeners. And I got to say, you told me of more than one story of people who are just reaching out like, hang in there, girl, you can do this. People telling you stories about getting degrees late in life, which I found very inspiring.
Yeah, like
actually.
Melissa, she said she went back to school in her mid-40s and graduated with a bachelor's degree, and that's after, you know, marrying young, having kids young, not finishing school. So she told me to hang in there, and I told her she needs to congratulate herself for earning a degree. It's a big deal.
Well, I mean, I'm always impressed when people go far in education when they're younger and have like an idea where they want to go and really put a lot of hard work in. But there's really something to be said for someone who is out for years, decades possibly, and lives life, goes through life, gets beat up by life, and they still go back and make this monumental change in their life.
You know, this might not be a popular opinion, but it's mine, and I'm going to share it. I'm the queen of unpopular opinions. I think the pressure for young people to finish high school and then immediately go on to college and choose an area of study and a career so early on when they're barely adults and they haven't lived or experienced life and they don't really know what they want to do, and there's all this pressure for them to make these decisions so early.
They haven't worked.
I just don't think that's a great idea. And I think, why do we not normalize like young people finishing school, taking time off, maybe doing something for a few years and then coming back maybe in their mid-20s or even
Early
late
30s.
20s, early 30s, when you've had some experience, you've lived a little bit, and you have more awareness about what you want to do. Because I can tell you, my career goals at 18 are not my career goals in my 40s.
No, that's a really great point. And it's one thing to study to do something. It's a whole nother thing to go do it day in and day out, week after week. So I think that's a really great point you're making.
Well, and I've had so many friends who studied certain, a degree of study, let's say history or what have you, and then they don't even work in that field. They never use their degree. They went to college for 4 years just to get a degree to get a job, but they're not really counting on that degree to help them along because they're working in a completely different field. And how many people do we know that have gone to college, they choose a major, they get into it, they hate it,
Yeah.
or they finish school, get a job, and they're like, I thought I wanted to be a nurse, but I absolutely hate it, and end up doing something completely different.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think our society needs to maybe reevaluate the way we do things.
Well, see, it seems like education is almost slow to evolve with the times. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Because, used to, you only went through so many grade, basically elementary school, and then they figured out we needed a little more skills and more learning. So, they kept adding, and then they added high school. And now I honestly think they should add junior college or community college on top of high school. I think everyone should get that. That would be a good place to do this little kind of break you're talking about. You go there, you do your, what they call them, the general ed.
Yeah.
That everyone has to do. You go do your general ed, and you maybe, play with some vocations or different tasks, or maybe have internship programs in different fields, paid, which, I think companies take advantage of interns a lot of times. Maybe that's a good chance for people. I think everyone should have access to that. Community college, that is. And then you could bounce on to, into a university.
Because how many of us know what we want to be when we grow up? I think it takes a long time to figure that out sometimes.
I always wanted to be an ex-fencer, ex-paper maker who works in the logistics trucking industry.
Well, congratulations. You are successful.
Part-time podcaster. So I'm living my dream.
Living the dream.
So, but not everyone gets to hashtag win like I did.
Thank you, Rufus, coming over here and shaking.
Yeah, he's rubbing
shaking your recent bath off on me.
Could you imagine if humans acted like dogs? I've
No.
said this before. What if every time I got out of the shower, went and rubbed my butt all over the couch and
Wallered it?
rolled in the floor?
Yeah, I know.
We had to give his
Or you're just
little,
on the sidewalk taking a poop and making eye
Yeah.
contact with someone while you're doing it.
I always give you that look.
Because the
like,
dog will stare at you like, I don't know,
look into my eyes.
like almost like, help me, or, I'm just like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Doo-doo-doo.
Well, sometimes it's the help me look, and sometimes it's just, this is happening. There's no way to change
It's
it.
happening.
Oh, he was a stinky boy. He had to get cleaned.
Yes. I think he rolled around in the squirrel carcass the other day.
Oh, did you see that one on the corner up the road?
Yeah, he rolled around on it.
Because he knows exactly where it's at. I had to catch him when I was walking him.
Yeah.
So did he really roll on that?
What do you think?
Oh, my God.
He's gross. He's a gross
right.
little dog.
All right, buddy. We're working.
All right.
Go away.
Dylan, are you ready to get into today's episode?
I am. I think this is a very interesting case. I thought it was very sad when I heard about it happened. But it really reminded me that this was a wild time for this industry that this involves.
Well, I've listened to, other podcasts who've covered this case. It's not obscure. I'm sure a lot of folks are aware of the case we're going to discuss today. But hopefully I will give you some insight maybe that you didn't have.
Well, you just in the little bit of a discussion we've had about the case while you're working on it, I've learned tons. So I have no doubt that you'll do your magic on this case.
Well, Dylan, I like to think about, while I was researching this case, a thing popped into my mind. And it's that in life, we can appreciate a person's work, like, let's say their art, while acknowledging and condemning their problematic actions or their personal behavior. I know in modern world, cancel culture has made its way through, and A lot of folks' careers have been ended over things that they potentially did in their personal life.
Even 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, that's true, and if you went around canceling, like I think about, rock stars and like music I love and artists that I love their music, like David Bowie. And if we went around canceling everybody who had some sort of problematic behavior, like there probably wouldn't be any music and there wouldn't be any art left. There wouldn't be movies. I mean,
no, I agree with that.
So you kind of have to get to a place where you're able to sort of separate like the person from the work.
Right. But, maybe to a certain degree, if someone kills a truckload of babies, I might not be able to support them anymore.
One artist I am okay with never supporting their work again, though, because their work sucked from the beginning, and then you find out they're like a shitty person, is the Diddy.
Well, look,
because all of his songs were like not good,
that doesn't
and
count.
So fuck the Diddy, right?
That doesn't count because you weren't fucking with Diddy. You know what I mean?
Never fuck with Diddy.
His rap was garbage, and I always thought he was a talentless hack who may have had a nose for business, and I felt like he did nothing but ride other people's coattails and talent. Fuck Diddy, bro.
Well,
you know what's funny? There's been like 29 shows about the fall of Diddy. Isn't it funny?
It's like they were all just waiting
it's almost like
to push the execute button on all these shows they had in the can about him.
They're very well produced as well. They're very highly produced. And it's like they already had them made or something. It's weird.
Well, and kind of going along with that of being able to separate someone's work from like who they are personally, it's that, there could be a person who has maybe two sides to them, like a Jekyll and Hyde. And sometimes two truths can exist, but be impossible to reconcile.
Oh, wow. Okay. I wish I thought like the way you write.
Thank you.
I really do. I feel like I'd be smarter.
Christopher Michael Benoit was born May 21st of 1967 in Montreal, Canada, into a modest middle-class family. He was the only son of Michael and Margaret. They did already have a daughter named Lori, but, he's their only son. Chris was shy, he was frail, and considered an obedient child, really doted on by his family because he's the only boy. And for some reason, there are certain families that like is a big deal.
Well, and I think it happens if it's the only boy or only girl, and there's, multiple siblings and, 3 or 4 boys, and then there's the one girl. I think it happens both ways, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Due to his diminutive size, Chris was often ostracized by other children because he was just a little fella. Like even as a kid, he was always underweight and a lot smaller than the other kids in class. And I can kind of relate to that. I remember being like one of the like runts of the litter in school.
I bet you were.
And well, not now, but people were like a foot, I'd be in like the 4th grade and people were like a foot taller than me.
Is it weird to stare up to most of the world? Have to look up all the time? I'm not being funny. I'm like, is that weird?
Well, I don't do that.
You don't stare around?
It depends on if I'm wearing my chunky golf boots. So let's just say, he was kind of bullied. People called him names like he was a little shrimp and little wimp and things like that. Now, during roughhouse play, his older sister Lori would overpower him and, quote, manhandle him.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm sure for like a little boy, that's kind of got to be bothersome for, his mom and dad to be like, oh, you're getting beat up by your sister.
Yeah, that's got to be tough.
You had an older sister. Did she beat you up?
No.
She overpower you?
Well, no. I'm a big boy. There might have been a minute there where she was, older and had size on me. But, I hit my growth spurts early on.
Margaret worried about her son because he was so quiet and often sat alone in his bedroom just reading or daydreaming. And though he was undersized, Chris did make good grades. He never got in trouble at school, and they considered him to be a good kid.
Well, yeah, they're like, hey, Chris, come in the living room. Let your sister beat you up. We're all going to watch.
He spoke fluent English and French, which I think is really cool. Again, Rufus, thank you. Shake it off, bud. This is like the Taylor Swift of the podcast.
I honestly think being bilingual with any languages is super awesome. and pretty awesome, pretty cool.
I honestly think this dog is trying everything he can to sabotage this episode.
Right now, he is solely intent on us playing, catering, laying with him, doing whatever he wants. And but now he's settling in, so I think we're going to get our work done.
I've got to focus. He's distracting me. When Chris was 12, the family moved from Montreal to Edmonton, which was basically across the country from like one side of Canada to the other. And probably definitely, I would say, a culture shock. Montreal, city, and then you've got Edmonton. It's more like rugged.
Well, see, I think in Canada there's that really stark contrast between, like, everywhere has the city, quote unquote, and the country, but in Canada, I mean, it's literally very quickly you can get into the wilderness.
Yes.
Like, I mean, just sparse population. No stores, no big chains.
Well,
things like
in
that.
Montreal, I mean, you've got like that heavy French Canadian influence. People are speaking French. And then when you get out to like Edmonton, Calgary, it's not really a thing. So it just seems like a very different culture. Chris had been watching professional wrestling on television since he was 3 years old, having first seen a match with Andre the Giant. In Calgary, Stampede Wrestling was owned by Stu Hart. For 50 years, it was one of the main wrestling promotions in Western Canada. The Hart family is legendary in the world of wrestling.
Yes, they are.
So you know about the Hart family?
Oh yeah, I watched this documentary. It's a lesser known Hart. This guy who's tried to make it in wrestling, and he was just a goober, huge doofball. But yeah, the Hart. What I think's amazing is about these wrestling federations, these small groups. It was a big deal, to kind of rise to the top in your little region. It can be very regional. It can be national. And it's high stakes.
We're going to get into more of that.
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely correct. And then we're going to talk more about the history of wrestling and a consolidation that happened.
Well,
and
it's wrestling.
Whatever. No. Around this time, Chris takes a special interest in Stampede. And he begins like watching that regularly on television and even attending some of the live events with his father. Immediately, Chris is taken by an English wrestler called Dynamite Kid, whose real name is Thomas Billington. Dynamite Kid is a lot like Chris Dillon. He's a little guy. And in him, Chris found a hero.
So here he sees a guy more looks like him. I mean, it's what people always say. People want to see someone who looks like them they can relate to. He sees this guy out there doing this thing he loves.
Billington had grown up in a violent, dysfunctional family where he was ridiculed and beaten throughout childhood. In the ring, he was often the heel. Now, can you explain to us what the heel is, Dylan?
The heel is the villain.
Exactly.
The person the crowd loves to hate.
So he was often the heel, and he was hated because he had this nasty attitude in the ring. Behind the scenes, Billington had been bullied for his size and learned to retaliate in cruel ways. There are stories of him beating another wrestler who picked on him until the guy's teeth loosened. Once he scalded someone's head, causing serious burns.
Oh, God.
And another time, he took revenge on what he considered an asshole manager. He knew the guy smoked, so Dynamite poured lighter fluid in the toilet bowl, and the man ended up being burned basically from his butthole to his balls.
Oh, my God. He, like, flicked a cigarette or what? Lit a cigarette on the toilet and is fuming? Damn.
Yes.
So, a lot of times in a retaliatory thing wrestlers would do is they'd go off script. The whole match is scripted. They've gone over it. I'll do this move, then you do this. And everything's made to look real, but it's fake. Very athletic. Hard to do. I'm not saying it's not.
Well, it's like scripted storylines.
Yeah,
Yes.
but going off script or hurting someone for real in the ring is like a really big deal.
Well, to say that Dynamite might be a psychopath is probably too kind. This guy definitely had issues.
Well, yeah, it's one thing to be harassed or picked on or called names, but some of his reactions there sounded like a little bit overboard.
Dynamite exhibited sadistic behavior, which was exacerbated by steroid use. And to say the least, Billington didn't have a lot of fans. So when 12-year-old Chris Benoit dared to approach him and gush over Billington's talent and skills, the hardened Dynamite Kid softened. He rarely got that kind of attention. From then on, Chris Benoit idolized Dynamite Kid. Chris started lifting weights. He begged his parents for a weight set, and Christmas of 1979, when he was 13 years old, his parents finally relented and bought him a little weight set.
The DP for life.
Probably.
The concrete filled weights, brightly colored from like Kmart, which they don't.
Sears.
It's in Canada, but they're equivalent to Sears. I know exactly what these weights were like back in the day.
Chris made a room in the house, kind of into a home gym, and even put up the mirrors so he could watch himself work out.
Do you watch yourself work out when you're working?
The last thing I want to see when I'm working out is myself. One, I don't want to catch a glimpse of my body in the mirror, period, because I'll probably have body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
But two, as I'm like squatting and grunting and shit, the last thing I need to see is like that my body in those positions and motions. It's like Seinfeld's Bad Naked. I mean, although I'm clothed. No, I don't need
naked.
I don't need to see it.
I watch myself.
I bet you do.
When I get the heavy weights on there, bro, and I'm just, I'm going to town, I like to see it.
Yeah, I try to avoid like exercising in front of mirrors, Dylan.
I'm like, oh my God, there's a little muscle trying to poke out from the fat.
How cute. Now, Chris began working out constantly and at school. So instead of eating lunch, he would go to the school's weight room to lift. He was working out at home, before school, after school. Friends fell by the wayside due to Chris's hyper focus on exercising and his obsession with wrestling. Wrestling and the Dynamite Kid were all he spoke of. And after a while, other kids grew bored because there's only so much you can say about wrestling and the Dynamite Kid.
Well, and that's how kids are, that's why there's the term fad. Things come and go that grab their attention. But very seldom is an entire group of friends going to be this focused on one thing that you love so much.
It was like Chris had tunnel vision, only focusing on athletics. He was competitive and willing to practice with his coaches, and they appreciated that as he became involved in school sports. While in high school, Chris began getting informal training from Mike Hammer, another wrestler in the Canadian circuit, who was described as having a bit of an unsavory character.
Oh, gosh.
Like he might have been a drunk pervert.
Oh.
Chris began using steroids as a teenager as well. Because he was a small guy, starts using the steroids, but little does he know they stunt your growth.
Yeah, they do. They have a lot of serious side effects.
Now, after Chris graduated from high school, he arrived at the Hart Dungeon in the summer of 1985. Hart Dungeon was the training facility owned by Stampede and Stu Hart. Chris was the lightest applicant. He was only 5'8" and weighed 40 pounds less than everyone else. Not only was he the shortest guy, but also the youngest. Stu and the Hart family were immediately impressed with Benoit's dedication and eagerness to work with them. Stu Hart's training technique was called stretching, which consisted of putting trainees in these painful submission holds and holding on for a long time to improve their pain endurance.
Oh, gosh.
They're basically torture sessions. Bodybuilders and football players would show up. These big meat-headed guys.
They couldn't take it.
No, they would leave after a session. Men would vomit, urinate, and sometimes shit their tights training with Stu.
Damn, man. Stu go hard.
Yeah. Really hard.
Now, I could never do this type of thing. I don't like being uncomfortable like that. You know what I mean?
Oh, I know.
Well, if I put you in a hammerlock, I don't even know what that is, but if I put you in a hammerlock right now, I think I know what it is. You might not like it.
You put me in any kind of lock, and I'm probably going to stomp your ass, okay?
You're going to kick my
You'll
ass.
You'll meet your match, because I'm like a little angry Tasmanian devil.
I would hate to try to hold on to you.
Yeah, don't. Don't try. Now, Hart knew there was no easy way to teach wrestling, so he just felt like he needed to set up his trainees to be able to take anything.
Well, I mean,
Take on anything that was handed to them in the ring.
in a weird way, I mean, a lot of people could get in there and try some of the moves, and learn how to fake it, make it look good, sound good, which is a big part of it, making it sound good. But then when the rubber meets the road, they're not going to be able to handle it because wrestling's grueling. Their schedules are insane. I mean, they work more than any professional athlete in any league as far as days out of the year, especially when you're on the grind in these smaller circuits. So he's, in a weird way, setting up a fairly effective screening program with this very intense type of training.
When the green Benoit showed up, some of the bigger meathead trainees were making fun of him. They were mocking his size. Yet Chris was the last man standing. He put these guys to shame.
I think his size can be a bonus or a plus in many ways, especially when you get into the acrobatics and the flying around off the top rope and things like that,
Chris's training quickly progressed from shooting and bumping to in-ring practice. Now, I don't really know what any of these terms mean, but I'm sure someone out there does.
Look, okay, I don't know. I don't know all the technicals, but the shooting might be like when you run and you bounce off the rope.
Well, that's the thing, because there's running the ropes, and
Yeah.
I think the shooting and bumping is kind of when they
You
run
shoulder
around
block
and bump into each. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and I
kinda
come
think
back to the
that's
center
maybe
of
what
the
it
ring,
is.
and you're standing there, and I kind of shoulder block you and kind of run through you, knock you down. Yeah, we can figure this out.
Bring it on.
Oh, I don't want to shoot and bump with you.
I'll play derby. I'll shoulder the fuck out of you. I'll get you right in the damn sternum. You ready to do this?
Baby, don't. When you
I was actually, when I was researching this, I was comparing a lot of what they do to roller derby. And we'll get into that in a second. So wrestling consists of choreography, and it takes real skill. Running the ropes can cause liver damage, cracked skulls, if it's not done correctly. A basic flat back bump carries the risk of broken arms and concussions. Any wrestling move is potentially fatal if performed incorrectly.
Oh my gosh.
The body needs to be conditioned to fall in certain ways, an unthinking reflex like the muscle memory. And that's the part that made me think about roller derby, because there's no easy way to teach the sport, and you're going to fall and you're going to get hurt, but it's learning how to minimize your fall and try to fall as safely as possible.
Right.
And that kind of thing. And it is muscle memory, so that when you're in a bout and somebody knocks you down, instead of falling big and potentially breaking a leg, you kind of learn how to do this small falls that minimize the potential of a broken ankle, a concussion.
Well, that's like in football.
Yeah.
Even with all that equipment on, every single play, I wouldn't be able to get up. And these guys just fly around and slam into each other like it's nothing,
Yeah. Benoit racked up about 1,000 training hours on just simple solo maneuvers with other wrestlers. Chris focused on perfecting his moves and would seek out new partners to train with. During the week, he worked alongside his father in Edmonton, then took the bus to Hart's Dungeon in Calgary every weekend for brutal training sessions. Ross Hart would say, quote, "Benoit was a natural. He learned everything so fast. He was always patient and respectful, never a know-it-all." When his mother learned of the Hart's torturous training regiments, she was appalled. She worried constantly about her son's body when he turned 40. She knew, when 40 comes, baby, low back pain's going to get you.
Well, and this is long before they started, the science started coming out about these collisions and repeated blows to the head and having repeated concussions no matter what you're doing.
Oh, we're going to talk about all that. Yet there was something that Benoit lacked. Despite all of his skills and knowledge and being a perfectionist and training.
And his passion.
Yes. I mean, this guy's passionate. I mean, I also want to say, I think we can kind of see maybe cracks in his mental stability early on. But just because of this, neuroticism he has about wrestling and this obsessive compulsive need to work out all the time. I mean, I think that kind of shows early on that, maybe the guy has some issues.
Right.
But there was something else that he liked, Dylan, and it was the art of selling. So this is pivotal in the success of a wrestler. You want the audience to suspend their disbelief. You want to fake pain instead of actually being in pain. You want to do the least amount possible and earn the most money to be successful, right?
Right.
And some folks in the world of wrestling have called Chris Benoit a mark because he was young and gullible and is willing to get in the ring and do anything to make it without really thinking about the consequences. Whereas you get a guy like Hulk Hogan who's showy and flashy and talks shit and, can pretend like, oh, I'm getting hurt, but doesn't actually do these acrobatics and tricks and things that are really going to get him injured. Does that make sense?
No, I mean, that totally makes. I grew up watching when I was little. I watched wrestling, and I grew up watching Hulk Hogan, Tugboat, and Macho Man, and all them. Jake the Snake. I mean, big time legends.
Well, I mean, like what's his name? I'm sorry, Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah,
that guy's like, he looks like Grimace, and he's slow
out
and
of shape,
not peak performance level. But people loved him.
People loved him because he had that X factor.
Yes.
See, that's what's amazing, honestly, about wrestlers is they're athletic, and all the training and all that you're describing them going through just to learn the basics. But you got to be like a good actor too, or an actress, because you have to be able to live and be this character. And they have to create their own character. You know what I mean?
And there are so many characters. You had Hulk Hogan. You had Randy Savage, Macho Man, and he wore those neon costumes and over the top. And then you have Ric Flair with his bleached out mullet. And he was like a masterful shit talker, always talking about all the watches and limos and women he was banging. And I mean, it was like a whole shtick.
Limousine riding and jet plane
yes.
flying. I mean, he had the Ultimate Warrior, but you're mentioning these guys: Macho Man, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan. They've really crossed over into pop culture. I mean, they're pop culture icons. I mean,
step into a Slim Jim.
People know around the world recognize these people. You know what I
mean?
They
do.
They really do.
But we also need to discuss how young wrestlers were treated at this time. I mean, I don't know if things have changed, but this is from the 70s into the 80s. There were a lot of secret rules and etiquette that was required in the locker room brotherhood. Like, if there were any perceived slights or disrespect, a young wrestler could be blackballed by his peers and be out on his ear, and then nobody would book him.
Oh.
Like, if somebody didn't like you or they felt like you did something you weren't supposed to do, you crossed the line. So it was really like you had to learn all this secret code.
This code of ethics for wrestlers.
And at any given moment, you could be hazed. Assaults were happening. So not only could you get your ass kicked in the ring, but behind closed doors, you might get a serious beatdown because somebody didn't like the way you looked at them.
A bunch of big muscly guys who really are strong. I mean, you might want to say all this stuff's fake, but these are a bunch of big guys.
And they were constantly ribbing each other. Pulling pranks, kind of these hazing types of things, but they could really get out of hand.
Gosh, have you ever heard the legend of Andre the Giant's drinking?
Yes.
My God. The dude would, in an evening, 2 cases of beer and 9 bottles of wine.
Yeah.
In an evening.
Yeah.
Jeez.
It's was it Wade Boggs' chicken?
Yeah.
Didn't he supposedly eat 21 rotisserie chickens or something?
My God.
I don't know. I just remember they talking about it on Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I know nothing.
I mean, I just couldn't imagine. Of course, I mean, he was a huge, huge man. I mean, he goes beyond just a big guy, obviously.
He was the giant.
He was a giant.
Now, after 4 to 5 months of taking these severe beatings at trainings and just keeping his mouth shut, Chris Benoit debuted on November 22nd, 1985 on a Friday night television show with the Stampede Wrestling. Considered a, pretty boy because he's young and cute, Benoit was teamed up with the other heartthrob wrestler named Rick Patterson. Now, at the time, Benoit was about 210 pounds. The use of steroids and all of this training had allowed him to add about 40 pounds to his small frame. Wearing red tights, the tag team faced off against Butch Moffat and Mike Hammer, who was his original trainer. And Butch Moffat was known as a bit of a heel. Benoit did little in his first match, but he showed potential. He sold the beating like a pro. And in the end, people agreed that Benoit looked more polished than his 3-year veteran tag partner. By Benoit's 5th match, he was being compared to his boyhood hero, the Dynamite Kid. Benoit was finally asked to move into the Hart House until he could find an apartment in Calgary, which meant then he could train not only on the weekends, but like every day. Was becoming like a full-time Stampede wrestler.
So, he's got to be over the moon at this point. I mean, really, here he's put all this effort and training, and now he's gotten a chance to actually wrestle on Stampede on TV. He's getting, admiration from people he really respects. So I'm sure he's really into this.
The Stampede crew braved Arctic weather to travel to events. 6 days a week, the wrestlers were traveling in these 2 old vans, driving up to 15 hours a day away from Calgary in horrible weather conditions. The vans had no heat in the winter, which led some people to wonder how the Hart family was living in mansions and riding around in limousines but couldn't afford to upgrade their travel vans.
Just get a couple of vans, dude.
A breakdown in these conditions could be deadly because hypothermia can set in really quickly. Yet the wrestlers lived in a constant state of frat house antics. There were ring rats, which are groupies, of women who offered up sex to wrestlers at every stop. Benoit never indulged in the sex antics, according to others. There was also a steady stream of booze, steroids, pain pills, and recreational drugs. The party never ended for these guys. At 19, Benoit traveled to Los Angeles en route to Tokyo, Japan. See, after World War II, Dylan, wrestling became a huge sporting event in Japan. Unlike North America, Japan's wrestling patrons were millionaires who were willing to spend big money.
Really?
And a lot of Japan's wrestling at this time, I'm not saying it still is, but back in the day, had a lot of Yakuza backing.
Oh.
Yeah. New Japan Pro Wrestling's dojo was a sadistic boot camp that made Hart's Dungeon look like a birthday party.
Oh my God, dude.
Some trainees experienced death at the dojo, and a lot of these were covered up by the Yakuza.
So, I just can't even imagine what they're doing if it makes what was going on in the Hart training camp seem like a child's play.
Yeah. Just the workout part before you the warm up was like a 4-hour brutal training before you even got in the ring to spar or whatever.
Isn't it funny how wrestling really is has all these different it's huge in Mexico, right?
And Benoit will travel to Mexico.
And you've had a lot of big stars, Eddie Guerrero, and some big stars come out of Mexico. But it's crazy.
We're going to talk about Eddie Guerrero too, Dylan.
Wow, I didn't know I was so well prepared for this episode.
Rookies were paid about $50,000 a year just to train at the dojo. Benoit, along with a guy named Daryl Peterson, showed up together. The training was rigorous, and the rookies were treated terribly. No one spoke to these guys in English and just ignored them. Wouldn't even talk to them. They played not only these physical torturous games, but they were being mind fucked all the time too.
That'd be so weird to be in another country and you already have the culture shock, even if everybody's being friendly. But then to have people treat you like this, it must be very strange.
And they were given their diets were food they weren't accustomed to. They were given little bits of food. And they were miserable because it was stuff that they didn't want to eat. It would be some kind of nasty fish head soup or something, and
Yeah,
but you couldn't complain. It was like all you had to eat.
and these guys are working out. They got to eat a lot to maintain that physique.
There were dojo runaways who would flee the program in the dark of night to get away from it.
My God.
Most didn't last for one session. In the 1980s, a New Japan wrestler was kind of like the equivalent of an Olympic athlete. Like that's how they were viewed with like the level of training they were getting. One of the first barbaric sessions involved a group of Japanese wrestlers viciously punching Benoit in the ears repeatedly until they were mangled.
Ah.
All the cartilage in his ears were bloodied and destroyed, resulting in cauliflower ears.
I was going to say, he probably got cauliflower ear from that.
So
Now,
that's the kind of shit they did to these guys.
if no one's ever seen that, and you get this from collegiate wrestling as well, it's just from the ear being
Boxing,
mashed.
don't they?
Boxing, yeah.
Yeah.
Just from your ear being mashed or smashed or hit, it kind of puffs up, and it looks painful and it looks really gross, honestly. And it's kind of hard to. I don't even know if you can get rid of it once it happens.
No, once
it's
it happens,
basically all torn up.
I think your ears are just fucked. 'Cause your
Jeez.
ears are full of like tiny little bones.
Yeah. Well, I think I have cute ears.
Well, after 5 months of inhumane cruelty called training, Benoit debuted in the ring at New Japan. He wrestled for 6 months before being sent back to Calgary. In November of 1987, he returned to Japan as a full-fledged roster member. Unlike in North America, Benoit was treated like a king in Japan. So while these wrestlers in Canada don't even have heat in the van and are like freezing to death, these guys were given luxury accommodations. They were treated to $1,000 dinners by the Yakuza, and rich patrons lavished them with gifts.
So once you go through almost this hazing ritual period, once you make it, then you're treated like a royalty.
Like a rock star.
Wow.
Yeah. His hero Dynamite had been seriously injured in 1986 with a severe spinal damage, and he even suffered temporary paralysis during this injury, mainly because he was performing the flying headbutt, which was one of his signature moves, and it was a move that Benoit had emulated and had like sort of taken this move and was using the flying headbutt.
Sounds dangerous.
Well, it is. And Benoit continued to do the flying headbutt even after realizing the dangers it posed. I mean, here's his icon, his like idol, this icon, this guy he looks up to is in poor condition, temporarily paralyzed,
Right.
like super fucked up from doing this move. And Benoit sees like this could be me, but still keeps doing it.
I mean, I don't understand that, but I think when people are do dangerous things like this, they kind of don't view it the same. You know what I mean?
To handle the chronic pain, Dynamite was doubling his steroid intake. He was loading up on painkillers and drinking like 40 ounces of vodka a day.
That sounds very healthy.
Can we just say, I don't mention this, but in the end, Dynamite's going to end up being paralyzed in a wheelchair, living off welfare.
Damn.
Like, yeah.
After all that.
It does not end up in a positive way.
I think that may be a factor for a lot of these wrestlers, and the way the end game turns out for them, especially the people that never make it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it reminds me of the Mickey Rourke film, The Wrestler.
Yeah, I think that
I was thinking about that a lot while I was writing this case.
I think the reason that movie was such a good movie and kind of moved people, even people that weren't wrestling fans, is because it was very realistic. And, of course, Rourke's a great actor, I think.
Yeah, I think he's amazing.
I think he's very underrated, personally.
I love him in Sin City.
Yeah, but he's amazing.
The Wrestler.
And he's just...
Angel Heart.
These guys go through just day in and day out. It's such a grind. It's very hard what they do.
Well, there was a wrestler called Bad News Allen that I believe had gone to the Olympics in judo.
Oh.
Well, he begged Vince McMahon. Is it McMahon or McMahon?
It's McMahon.
McMahon.
Vince McMahon.
I knew I always butcher his name because I know it's like the way it's spelled.
McMahon.
It doesn't look like the way
Yeah.
it's spelled.
No, but there's actually
Vince McMahon. Okay.
a real big doc that dropped on Netflix about him, and it actually touches on a lot of this.
Isn't he kind of a big piece of shit?
He's kind of crazy.
Because that's what I get from a lot of my resources.
He's a
is that
megalomaniac.
He's like kind of
honestly.
cutthroat, like
Yeah.
just terrible piece of shit.
Well,
being.
he would use these guys up and
Yeah.
spit them out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
On his way to being a billionaire.
So in the meantime, this wrestler named Bad News Allen, who had also worked the Japan circuit, begged Vince McMahon, I will get that, the American promoter, to hire Chris Benoit as Dynamite's replacement. Dynamite also had these other issues. A wrestler that he had tormented named Jacques Rougeau took out a mafia hit on him at some point. There had also been another gangland murder of a wrestler named Dino Bravo. Crazy.
It's crazy.
I just had to mention that because I was like, what? Okay.
Well, the fact you even know mafia people that you could, get a hit going.
By 20 years old, Chris Benoit had collected multiple title belts in Japan and Canada, and along with this, brain damage. Those who knew Benoit saw two sides of him. He was a quiet, reserved, nice guy until the steroids kicked in. And this would continue, this sort of Jekyll and Hyde persona. Benoit's hero Dynamite was spiraling. He shoved a gun under his wife's chin while he was high on drugs. She actually considered murder-suicide with her two children to escape him because she was so afraid of this guy and what he was capable of.
That's very sad and scary.
Right. So Benoit is following in this guy's footsteps all the while this guy is
deteriorating.
A fucking maniac.
Yeah.
And he's seeing, I'm doing all the same things this guy's doing, and this is where my hero is. I mean, the writing's on the wall, bud. You could be headed here, right?
Well, it's almost like you're definitely headed here. You know what I mean? Between the substances and the injuries and your signature move being a flying headbutt. Well,
that's why I think when people scratch their heads and are like, how could this happen? I think the real question is, how could this not happen? There are red flags all along, and the writing's on the wall for Chris Benoit from an early point in his career that he just chooses to ignore and keeps heading down this path.
Full steam ahead.
Yeah. Then in 1989, there was another blow to Benoit's world. Jasper Ross lost control of a van on an icy road in Canada, and that sidelined wrestler Davey Boy. Stu Hart and Stampede had lost most of their star wrestlers either overseas or to the United States.
Well, yeah, it sounds like they treated him like shit.
Davey Boy was, I guess, one of their big guys. Jasper Ross, all this. So the promotion began hemorrhaging money because they didn't have any kind of draw to the Stampede. Chris Benoit stayed with Stampede until the very end. Stu Hart finally closed the doors in order to save his family's fortune. So no more of Stampede wrestling in Canada. So during this time, Benoit suffered a pretty serious knee injury and was told to take the month off. But instead, he was back in the ring 3 days later, even with this fucked up knee.
That's dumb.
And despite lucrative offers from New Japan to return, Benoit stayed with Stampede, like I said, until the very end. It was only after Stampede officially closed that Benoit returned to Japan, this time with his hero Dynamite. There were also many changes happening within the world of wrestling. NWA Wrestling had been a small regional promotion that aired on television stations. It came with regular pay for the wrestlers, and promoters could fill the card with a variety of wrestlers. Like, you could have the big guys, the little guys. It was kind of like something for everybody, and fans loved it because there were so many, I guess, kind of options and different people to see.
Yeah. Well, you had almost these wrestling wars between these different federations. You had a WSW, I think, and the WCW, and
We're going to talk about
yeah,
that.
I mean, and yeah,
So WWE and WCW ended up running them out of business or absorbed them. So the independent promotions ended up shrinking by about 90%. Top performers like Hulk Hogan earned huge salaries, while the average, like regional wrestler, was frozen out. The consolidation in the 1980s changed everything. Wrestlers who managed to get signed with WWE or WWF had exploitive contracts with low pay and no benefits. I mean, all of these shitty deals were being handed out. Contracts would state that if you were fired or you quit, that you couldn't work for anyone else for a whole year. So then, like, if you were fired, you couldn't go work in Japan. And basically, you were just shut out from earning a living.
so it's a no-compete clause.
And then having a significant time off, like a year, I mean, that can end your career.
Well, you lose your fans. They move on. They forget about you. You're out of, performing shape. You know, it's no different than high level athletes. They can't just not do that thing for 6 months. They have to do it all the time and train for it all the time at a high level.
Billy Jack Haynes, a wrestler, said, quote, "We're all dying off to be a guinea pig for McMahon."
You know, one time famously, he was asked in an interview if there, you had all this steroid use and these wrestlers' lives just, spiraling out of control in various ways. And he's just like, do you have any responsibility for that, or does your company? And he's just basically like, no, of course not. What they do, it doesn't matter. I didn't do it. He's a dick. He's an asshole.
He's a shitbird.
He's a shitbird.
He's a rich shitbird.
But it just kills me when, which exploitation I think's been around since the beginning of humankind. Someone's exploited someone else, right? But what kills me is in situations like this is they're the talent. They're the reason for the season. And when you have these big companies, this is what happens when you have a consolidation like this, a corporatization of something like that. They used to be family-owned, regional. People cared about the performers. They, kept running it.
They were paid fairly.
They paid
because they wanted people to come back and wrestle.
They spread the money around. They appreciated what they brought to the table. And when the faceless corporation gets involved, all that goes out the window. And that's a problem across every industry in America.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, one of the wrestlers, Kevin Nash.
Yeah.
You know who that is?
Yeah, that's
He was
it the Big Hurt?
He was saying like when he signed a contract, I guess in the beginning with like WWE or something, they basically offered him, it was like I think it was $1,500 for like a year.
What?
And I suppose you could make more money,
like incentives in
like
your contract?
as you went. Yeah, but like you basically they could just pay you $1,500 and that was it. But he was like, you had to take it because what else are you gonna do?
Well, and that's the thing. Like earlier when you're talking about you getting blackballed and not getting booked, even in a small, a little small regional, then you can't do anything.
Well, when these big guys have a monopoly, there's not a lot of choice.
Well, there's all
left.
this, you've trained for years and years, and all of a sudden you can't, do your job. You can't do it anywhere. No one will do it with you. That would be a really scary thing to face. And you could see that, really exploiting people into a lot of bad stuff.
Taking time off for injuries jeopardized a wrestler's career as well. Many wrestlers worked through severe injuries or avoided needed surgeries just to keep their spot. By 1990, the Japanese felt Chris needed a gimmick because, again, he's kind of bland. Yeah, as much as I hate to say it, he's kind of bland.
He's vanilla. Be King Vanilla.
Kevin Nash, I guess, nicknamed him the Vanilla Midget.
Captain Beige.
They called him the Vanilla Midget.
Really?
Yeah. So the Japanese felt that Chris needed some kind of gimmick. They ended up giving him this blue mask that had like horse wings on the side of it.
That's exactly what he needed.
And they were calling him the Pegasus Kid. He was horrified. He had to learn to train in this mask. It was uncomfortable and he really hated it. But he became the Pegasus Kid. So Chris appeared on February 11th, 1990 to a sold-out crowd in Tokyo. There were 63,900 people at the event, and it earned about $4 million. Now, just before this, Mike Tyson had filled the arena with only about like half that.
Really?
Yeah.
A Mike Tyson fight?
Yeah. So this wrestling event brought in like 2 times the crowd that Mike Tyson's event had brought in. There was also a 23.2% TV rating, which was astronomical for wrestling, and it made the Pegasus Kid a star in Japan, even if Chris Benoit wasn't.
Wow. I wonder if that means like 23.9% of the audience that evening was tuned into that event.
Yeah, I don't really know how ratings work. Foreign wrestlers could earn between $300,000 to $400,000 for 20 weeks of work in Japan and receive top-notch celebrity treatment. Yet, even with this goal, or, the goal for Benoit and others was to perform in the United States.
So for less than 6 months, basically 6 months, less than 6 months, right? You said 20 weeks? Yeah, 52 weeks in a year, yeah. You can make, upwards of almost $500,000.
Yeah.
And be treated in luxurious accommodations the entire time. People fawning over you. Fans running around. Oh my God, I can't believe it's the flying headbutt. And
it's the Pegasus Kid.
Hey, don't watch out for that sun. Don't watch out.
Love your mullet,
Don't
sir.
you get near that sun.
Love how his mullet flies when he headbutts somebody.
I think that was the worst thing about the decision to put him in a mask, was covering up that Kentucky waterfall.
He had a pretty dope mullet. Now, during this time, Benoit performed alongside some other wrestlers, Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko, who would end up being basically his best friends, lifelong friends. Now, in the beginning, Eddie Guerrero and Benoit did not get along. Guerrero hated him. Just thought he was who's this prick, But they ended up becoming really good friends. Benoit also became best friends with a guy named Scott Norton while they were in Japan. Where Benoit had little charisma in the ring, Eddie Guerrero had mastered showmanship.
Yeah, Eddie Guerrero had the machismo, if you will. Isn't that what that's called?
Yeah.
The X Factor.
You don't have that.
I'll have that.
No, you don't.
Well, I can get some.
No.
I'll go down to Walmart's. Hey, where y'all keep that machismo at?
Aisle 6. Benoit jumped between Japan and Calgary, then to Mexico, where he earned a reputation as a top worker internationally. So he's just jumping around all over the place.
So no matter where he goes, even having been through some stuff already, his work ethic, his passion is still there.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody notices. Everybody's impressed.
Yeah, I mean, people are he's probably the hardest working wrestler in the industry, globally. Yeah. In the late 1980s, TV mogul Ted Turner had bought out Jim Crockett Productions, which was the WCW, and put the wrestling events on TBS.
Yeah, Turner had a big that was the big part, the big halves of the war. I want to say was Ted Turner versus, gosh, I can't remember which was what, but I think that was WCW versus WFW maybe. I'm not sure.
Dude, I don't know.
No, but Ted Turner was really...
Well, he was pretty instrumental in, putting wrestling on TV, making it, a national thing, and not just, a little regional, regional rinky-dink couple TV stations, that might show it in the South or, whatever. So he really kind of puts wrestling, on the forefront of, TV. You could pretty much guarantee you were going to find wrestling on TBS at some point.
Yeah.
It just kind of became known as one of the things the station did. But in 4 years, it lost $25 million because no one knew what they were doing. Ted Turner put TV people in charge who didn't know anything about wrestling. So in about 4 years, he realized I got to get somebody in here who's a promoter, who knows about wrestling, who could make this profitable.
Yeah, because it really is its own animal.
You
know what I mean?
It was in 1992 that Benoit made his American wrestling debut in Charleston, South Carolina, and he was teamed up with a guy named Biff Wellington for the Clash of the Champions. By 1993, Benoit was on his first tour with the WCW full-time. Now, he soon realized that American wrestling was totally different from Japanese wrestling. Americans liked colorful gimmicks, they liked storylines and drama. Unlike in Canada, the U.S. tours were usually through the Deep South, where instead of battling no heat, they battled no AC, and it was hot as hell. He also went to events in places like New York City, Chicago, Detroit. American wrestlers gave these cartoonish interviews on the mic. Ric Flair was famous for his shit-talking skills. Benoit, who was considered bland and boring, needed to work on his mic skills, and this was something he knew. Even Dusty Rhodes, who was slow in the ring, obese, and let's be honest, he's pretty ugly.
He's the American dream. You take that shit back.
He's not a good-looking man, and I think he would probably even admit that.
He had all the ladies.
He kind of looks like a big Pugsley or like Uncle Fester, but with like blonde hair.
He's not an attractive man. I'm sure you'd be the first one to admit it.
But he's amazing on the mic, and people loved him. And the ladies loved him. I mean, you're not wrong, because he had this charisma. Fans thought Benoit seemed robotic during interviews and would like joke, like, is he even human? Because when he interviewed, he talked like this, but with a Canadian accent.
Dude, you got
like it's about time to play.
You're talking about a great time during wrestling. You had so many characters and big personalities. And it doesn't matter how technical you are in the ring. This was half of it. This on the mic time, the talking to Mingjing Okerlund and all that, the shit talking each other. That was half of all of it.
And Benoit knew this, and just as he had like devoted himself to the physical aspects, he began a hawk-like study. He was watching interviews in hopes of learning how to be like these popular guys. He would like, if he had a chance, almost like interview them, like, give me tips. How do you do this? You know, it's like he really wanted to cut loose, but he just didn't know. Like, he just didn't know how. Just wasn't his personality.
It just doesn't have it, and that's a very hard thing for someone to develop when it's really not them.
Right. Cracks in Benoit's mental health had already started showing. I mean, not only was his obsession from an early age evident, but people nicknamed him Houdini because he would sort of just check out mid-conversation.
Oh.
Chris Jericho recalled a match in which Benoit made a minor mistake. Afterwards, Jericho found him hiding, and Benoit was punishing himself by performing 500 squats. Jericho was like, what are you doing, bud? And he's like, well, I have to punish myself by doing squats. And Jericho was like, did somebody tell you had to do squats?
Who's making you do the squats?
Yeah. And Benoit's like, I'm making myself do them.
God, you catch him like lashing himself.
Yeah. No, it was like a form of self-flagellation. I mean, he's like a masochist, like beating himself when he made a mistake. I mean, it's very strange, right?
That's a lot.
Yeah, well, Chris Jericho, I guess, was like his buddy, and even he was just like, okay, cuckoo. I mean, yeah. When Ole Anderson took over the WCW, for whatever reason, he stopped booking Benoit. Like, he just didn't like him or didn't feel like he
fit in,
added anything. He ended up moving to the ECW, which I think is Extreme Championship Wrestling. I think there's so many. I don't know. With Shane Douglas and Doug Malenko, and they became known as the Triple Threat. Benoit was known at this time for not only the flying headbutt, but a move he did called the Crippler.
Oh.
The WCW ended up calling again in fall of 1995, so he moved over there. Benoit became part of a team called the Four Horsemen. And part of the storyline was a feud with a wrestler named Kevin Sullivan. Kevin Sullivan had sort of suggested in this feud with the Horsemen that there be this kind of, it's very strange, like this relationship between Benoit and Sullivan's wife, Nancy, who was also a wrestler. She had been known as the Fallen Angel and then as Woman.
That's so creative.
We're going to talk more about Nancy.
Now, you told me a little bit about this, and it was very, very weird.
Well, what's so strange about it is it's Sullivan's idea, and he keeps pushing this narrative. And they would record these little vignettes in which Benoit and Nancy were cozied up together, like kissing on each other, drinking wine, or she'd be like caressing his chest.
Like backstage or in the dressing room.
Yeah, or at a restaurant or something. I'm actually I found one of them and I'm going to post it on Instagram. So if you follow us at Appalachian True Crime on Instagram, you'll be able to see it.
See, that's the thing. They didn't just create a character. They had to create an entire storyline. A lot of times.
Well, this is going to become a problem, and we'll get to why. But let's talk a little bit about Nancy. Nancy Toffaloni was born May 17th of 1964 in Boston, Massachusetts. She'd moved to Florida during her youth, and after high school, she got a job working as a receptionist at an insurance company. Nancy had been involved in wrestling promotion a bit, selling programs at Orlando shows, and she had also done some modeling. When Nancy was recommended for a Wrestling All-Stars photo shoot, she met Kevin Sullivan. Kevin asked her to be part of his wrestling entourage. She became his on-air valet, known as Fallen Angel, in 1984 at the Florida Championship Wrestling. Kevin had this persona as a Satanist, even though all he did was like wear the equivalent of like Norwegian death metal paint.
Yeah.
Like white with some black eye makeup.
Well, look, all he had to do back then was say the word Satan.
Well, that's it. Because everybody says he was actually like a pretty staunch Catholic or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he had this like whole Satanist persona. And Nancy became part of his stable. In 1985, Nancy and Kevin were married. At WCW, she created a persona called Woman, aligning once more with her husband, Kevin. She worked with Doom as a manager, then teamed up with Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen. It was during her return to WCW in 1996 as Woman that Nancy Sullivan was given an on-screen relationship with Chris Benoit. During a post-interview with Sullivan, there was a home video, and this is the one I'm going to post for everybody to see, of the couple shown to him where they're like canoodling in a restaurant. Woman taunts him by saying things like, "You can't find me. I'm my own woman. I do what I want."
Oh.
Yeah.
And there just happened to be a camera there.
In the TikTok era, Nancy would have been like such a feminist. Sullivan, who encouraged this on-screen affair, I mean, he would even tell them like they should be seated together going into events and stuff. So people found the storyline believable.
So he thought it was real.
Yeah. But then it's like he became really concerned that they were actually having an affair, even though he had encouraged this from the beginning. During a trip to Tokyo, Nancy would later say that Kevin physically assaulted her during an argument where he was accusing her of having an affair. Finally, Nancy said,
the affair you created for your storyline.
yes.
This is ridiculous.
Like, he puts her in this situation, but then he's really jealous.
He's like, look, I know you were just doing what I asked you to do to help my career, but I'm really
Kevin,
jealous.
just shut up, get your cuck chair, go sit in the corner.
No, just say, look, just put it to bed, end it, right? Wrap it up.
Oh, you think they should put it to bed, huh?
Just wrap it
Oh,
up.
we're going to get to that.
Just wrap up the storyline.
Well, finally, I mean, after a period of this, Nancy's just like, well, if you're going to accuse me of sleeping with Chris Benoit, then I'm actually going to sleep with Chris Benoit. They start having an affair, like a real affair.
She wanted to experience the flying headbutt.
She was wanting that crippler.
Yeah. Oh. I can't walk.
I can't feel my legs.
Get me a towel, Chris. I can't walk.
Oh, God. Benoit was married to a woman named Martina who lived in Canada, and they had 2 children. They had a son and daughter. Benoit was considered a family man and, by all accounts, an excellent father who was devoted to his children. I can't find a whole lot of information about Martina because most folks didn't want to talk about her. They respected her, the situation, respected her. And in the end, all she would say was that, Benoit had been a really good dad and that they all loved him. The affair was shocking only because Benoit had this reputation for being like a stand-up guy. Adultery was fairly common in the wrestling subculture. You had wrestlers sleeping with other wrestlers' wives. You had wives screwing around. I mean, it was pretty common for people to be like bed hopping.
Why does this happen in these types of? Why does this happen?
I don't know. And then, of course, there were groupies.
The ring
rats.
That's
Yeah.
great. That's almost as good as lot lizards. Not quite. Well, I don't think there's ever be a better term than lot lizards, but ring rats, it's a close second.
In 1997, Kevin and Nancy divorced. And one of the main reasons their relationship had soured kind of anyway was Nancy's desire to have children. And it seemed like Kevin didn't want kids. And she saw that her, biological clock is ticking. She's ready to have a family, like have children. Benoit's career wasn't really going anywhere until 1999. With the death of wrestler Owen Hart, Chris was up against Bret Hart for a tribute match.
Owen Hart, he fell from the rafters
Yes, he did.
doing a stunt where he was going to kind of come, lowered into the ring or something.
Yes.
Yeah, it was pretty tragic, and it kind of sent shockwaves through the wrestling world.
Absolutely. So they're doing this tribute match, and Chris is up against Bret Hart. A storyline in wrestling became sort of this idea of these young punks rising up against the establishment. And Benoit was a top star of that promotion. On February 25th of 2000, Daniel Christopher Benoit was born. Chris and Nancy were married on November 23rd of 2000. As WCW was dying out, it just didn't have the same star power of WWE and WWF, I suppose.
That's right.
Because it didn't have The Rock, or Steve Austin. At WWF, Benoit had beaten Triple H in a debut match, but wrestling was very political, and Triple H would eventually marry Stephanie McMahon, Vince's daughter, who would exert a lot of control over things through writing and...
I think his name was Hunter Hearst Helmsley. For real.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's what the Triple H.
So there's all these politics in wrestling
Is
as
that
well.
right?
And, so it's pretty obvious that, he's dating the boss's daughter, so he's going to be able to have a lot of input, and she's going to have a lot of input into, making someone's career or breaking someone's career.
Right.
WrestleMania 2000 saw Benoit win a major title against Kurt Angle. And at the end of that year, Benoit and Triple H had a brief feud. So, he's getting some play, I guess, in the world. But it's just not really... He's not The Rock.
It's like he's around the edges of big events, part of them, but he's not the reason.
Well,
or
you
he's
may
not the superstar.
Be wondering, why am I giving you such an intense backstory? But it's I really want people to know kind of how his career came to be and where he was in his career, because I think all of these things play a factor in the tragedy to come.
Yeah, I agree.
At Raw, Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit teamed up against Steve Austin and Triple H. Benoit was again pitted against Steve Austin at another Raw and at SmackDown.
Dude, now, during this time, and it's already been happening for a while, I think. I'm no wrestling historian. It's just what I remember. Wrestling was becoming so fucking huge.
I feel like in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was, and even into the mid 2000s and stuff, it was so big.
They were, early on, were some of the biggest numbers in pay-per-views.
Yes.
And, I think nowadays it may be lost on them what pay-per-view was or what it meant. But this was, you would literally get together with
a ticket,
4 or 5 of your friends, and you would pay $50, $100. That sounds like a lot, but people would
to access these events.
Everybody would kick in $5, and they would sit and watch this big event, huge event, and it was so over the top, and they were just making hundreds of millions of dollars off of these events.
Look, I don't know much about wrestling. I've never been into it. I remember as a kid it being on TV and my uncle watching, it ridiculous, the 80s wrestling that was so cheesy.
It was really cheesy.
Yeah. So, I vaguely remember that just being a kid. I was never a fan. I'm still not. It's not for me. But my cousin, Candace, she fucking loved wrestling. And this was like mid 2000s into like the 2010, early 2010s.
Okay.
She was like obsessed with it. I mean, she was all about it, and she was a huge John Cena fan.
Oh.
So my limited knowledge of wrestling comes from her and like her interest in this. I mean, she had a birthday cake with like John Cena airbrushed on it. She loved him, and she would be like, "Oh, you got to watch like these reality show that his girlfriends." I mean, just she was all about it. So, like I said, I know a little bit of this, but only peripherally, and through no fault of my own.
Sad to say.
Yes.
No, but the people love it. I've never had a problem.
Oh, dude, she had T-shirts, some memorabilia. Like, yeah.
That's the thing about wrestling fans; they're all in.
Oh yeah.
They're all in, and they are piggy banks for wrestling because they eat, live, breathe, love.
Dude, she had merch.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of like John Cena gear she
Action
had,
figures,
T-shirts and shit. Oh yeah.
Yeah, all the things.
I don't know if I don't think she's like as into it now. But dude, there was a minute there that
yeah, but this continued to grow.
It was a thing.
And I really think during this period's when it really became, and I could be wrong. It could have been other times.
No, I think this was the time.
Right.
In June of 2001, after months of neck pain, Benoit participated in King of the Ring. He received a nasty bump to the back of the head. He was told he needed neck fusion surgery and would miss 1 year of action. So basically, he's going to have bone taken out of his pelvis, like hip area, fused into his neck with titanium.
Damn.
It was the first time that Chris Benoit would be home with his wife and son, like without traveling.
So this was an injury he couldn't ignore.
Well, he had ignored it long enough.
Right.
Until they basically said, like, you have to do this.
Or you're going to be immobilized.
Nancy had learned to live with a husband who was gone. And so she and her son kind of had their own thing going on. And then all of a sudden, here's Chris, who's not accustomed to that day-to-day life or strain of family. On top of he's recovering from this surgery and he's depressed.
He's probably worried about losing his spot, I'm sure he maybe felt like he was on the edge of becoming that superstar. Who knows?
Chris and Nancy were drinking and using prescription drugs. Chris was still taking steroids. He was really depressed because the world of wrestling was continuing on without him. When Benoit returned to the ring a year later, he realized that he was being held back from superstardom at every turn. He had never won a title championship or been a top promotion, though many considered him to be one of the best wrestlers in the industry. And despite this, he was still voted into the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. Backstage, Benoit's behavior was extreme. People noted how he hazed younger wrestlers. One person described him as, quote, he was living in a world of shit.
Oh, that does not sound good.
It was clear that Chris Benoit was insecure and broken. The industry had swallowed him up, and he was a mark. People described him as being a mark because he was just kind of like this young, gullible guy who allowed the industry to do this to him.
Well, he's went early on. He started out with the Hart family. He's done these extreme things that a lot of other people wouldn't do. Went to Japan. I think he may have been better off if he'd stayed over there.
I agree.
He would have probably made a lot more money and maybe could have got out sooner. But I don't know. And it's just another story. And that's what makes what happens in the end. I was like, wow, I can't believe that guy did that. But it was also very tragic and sad at the same time.
When someone asked him advice on surviving, he told them, quote, keep your mouth shut. That was like his best advice for surviving the world of wrestling.
That sounds very emotionally healthy.
Yeah. In 2003, there was talk of Brock Lesnar wanting out of his WWE contract, and someone needed to carry the main event until John Cena and Randy Orton were prepped. So there was some discussion that maybe Benoit could fill this role. Maybe it was his time. Nancy and Chris separated in May of 2003. She filed for divorce and got a restraining order against her husband. In the divorce papers, Nancy demanded their home in Fayetteville, Georgia, along with an additional 8 acres the couple owned. She wanted $8,500 a month in support, ownership of their 2003 Hummer, and her share of Wolverine Sports, a company she used to manage her husband's career and assets. Nancy was called, quote, a tough bitch with a fiery temper by those who knew her. She had already been in an abusive relationship with Kevin Sullivan, and Nancy could hold her own. People knew that fights got physical between Chris and Nancy, like before this divorce. And in 2003, Nancy said that Chris had been damaging their personal belongings, like she listed that in the divorce papers, but denied any physical abuse. But Nancy had frequently shown up bruised and battered.
Well, and that's common for people to, I think, for one, they want to save face. And for two, I think it's embarrassing when that's happening in your home.
Yeah, and I mean,
to a degree.
Well, and people said, it wasn't just like, oh, he's a monster. Like she would she would be the first to get physical and instigate.
Well, she's an athlete too.
She's.
So we can't forget that.
I mean, so it was like.
I'm not saying that I'm just saying she's not a diminutive.
Well, yeah,
scared girl.
I'm just saying it was on both their parts.
Right.
There was physical violence on both their parts.
Right.
Despite his home life falling apart, Chris never mentioned the trouble to any of his colleagues. Eventually, Nancy allowed Chris to move back into the house and dropped the divorce and restraining order. But nobody really knows, like, why that happened or how that happened, what they were trying to work out. Because it doesn't sound like they were going to therapy or anything.
Well, I mean, they're just trying to figure it out. It sounds messy. A lot of people, do it, not... A lot of people go through stuff like this, maybe not exactly like this, but, a lot of times you don't know when your friends or families having issues like this inside their relationship. It's a very personal matter. It's not something you typically, discuss. You might have a bestie you talk to about it or something, but it's kind of a hard thing to talk about. And at the same time, you don't really want people's input. You know what I mean? You don't want people to say, well, I think you should. I don't want to, I'm dealing with this. It's my thing.
Yeah, but sometimes I think you're so locked in that having an outside person who can really see, like, this is fucking dysfunctional and dangerous.
I'm not saying it wouldn't be
this
great.
Is not okay. Like, sometimes you need an outsider to, like, set your frame of mind where it needs to be.
More times than not, that would be healthy and helpful if someone was able to, you were able. But a lot of times people just for whatever reason don't or can't feel like they can't talk to people about things like this.
Well, despite winning a world singles title at 2004's WrestleMania against Triple H, Benoit just faded to mid-card. So instead of that boosting him into that spot that Brock Lesnar was kind of leaving open, like, here's his chance, didn't get it again. Stephanie McMahon said, quote, it wasn't going to last. She said, quote, guys don't want to be him and girls don't want to fuck him. According to her, Benoit would never be a superstar in the ring.
Oh, gosh.
Chris Benoit suffered a serious personal blow in 2005. His best friend, Eddie Guerrero, died in his hotel room in Minneapolis. Chavo Guerrero, his nephew, along with a security guard, found him in the bathroom, still holding his toothbrush. And when they found him, he was alive, but he was pronounced dead by the time the ambulance arrived. Eddie was only 38 years old, and he had died of heart failure.
Damn.
Likely due to prolonged steroid use. Benoit seemed to fall apart after this. During a tribute to Guerrero, he just lost it. Like, he is weeping for his friend. The normally stoic Benoit was deeply impacted by the loss of Eddie. Nancy spent a month with Vicky Guerrero, Eddie's wife. Vicky recalled how Chris would climb into the couple's bed and hold Eddie's pillow, sobbing, or they would find him alone in Eddie's weight room, just crying. Benoit had lost 14 coworkers in a 16-year period.
Damn, that's a lot.
Suicide, drug overdoses, heart attacks,
Sudden deaths.
murders. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the world of wrestling, there is a lot of there's a definitely dark side to it. Now, after this, other wrestlers noticed a distinct change in Benoit's personality. Like they had thought he seemed to have just a complete like personality change, but it seemed like it got even worse after Guerrero died. He was solemn at nearly every venue. He would mention how he'd been there the last time with Eddie, and he began just spending all of his time alone. Yet with all the setbacks and career lows, Benoit made a voluntary decision to continue living this lifestyle. In June of 2007, a draft lottery sent him to ECW, which was known as a dumping ground for WWE. So again, I mean, at this point, I think, once more, the writing's on the wall. You're never going to be elevated to the level of like Hulk Hogan.
No.
You're never going to be a superstar. And at this point, you know, you kind of have to make a decision like, do I want to keep doing these like little mid-level performances?
And it makes you wonder what kind of money he's made at this
Or
point.
do you just get out?
I mean,
like-
I wonder if he has the money and assets to get out and change his life, or buy some business and, do something else or some other revenue streams, or if he's just kind of blown it along the way.
Well, regardless, Dylan, I think a lot of people make career changes and he could still get out and do something else.
Well, no, but
he could fall into being a trainer or, something like that.
Well, yeah, but in a world like this, and I think it's tough for athletes who have so much attention and admiration from fans and the public, that I think that's what they can't walk away from a lot of times. I don't think it's so much they just want to be doing that thing they've dedicated themselves to all these many years.
Yeah, but you know what? You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
Well, I got to say, the mentality in sports nowadays has changed quite a bit. You have young players deciding at the height of their careers that I've made a good chunk of money and I'm investing it in various other types of businesses, and I'm going to go be with my family while I can still talk.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, no, exactly.
Luke Kuechly, he was a monster linebacker, high football IQ.
Panthers, right?
Yeah. And he was like, I'm done. After his contract, one of his, second contract or so was up, he said, I'm gone. And I think that's really the way you need to view something like this. When you see the writing, like you said, the writing on the wall.
Well, he's been at it for, 20 years, more than 20 years at this point. This kind of damage to your body, you cannot continue to do this. Like, there's a very short window of opportunity to make it big. And if you don't, then at some point you have to walk away. I mean, was he going to still be trying to do this when he's 60 years old?
Right.
I mean, I guess that's the part of this story that I'm just like, bro, like, what are you doing? Get your head out of your ass. Go be with your family. Benoit was set to wrestle at Vengeance 2007, which was scheduled for June 24th of 2007 in Houston, Texas. In the months leading up to June of 2007, things were falling apart at home. Chris's steroid use was a problem. He was getting 10 months of steroids for a single month period.
I mean, I don't even know. I don't even think that helps you to use that much steroids like that. And can we say it's criminal that a doctor is continuing to give him that type of stuff?
Oh, we're going to talk about this doctor. Nancy and Chris were fighting over steroids constantly. She blamed his sexual impotence and erratic behavior on his use of the drug. When he was away, Nancy would hide or throw the drugs away, which would lead to these huge fights. I mean, they were out of control. He would lock her inside the house, refusing to let her leave, like take her phone.
Oh, that's not good.
No. Then Chris began hinting that he was having an affair with one of the divas, the WWE divas.
Which you got to think about it. How did their relationship start?
Yep, I know.
And when people have those types of relationships start like that, they're always insecure that someone else can kind of swoop in and do the same thing, right?
Well, he's like rubbing it in her face constantly, like dropping these hints that he's got this, this side piece, and she's a diva and she's hot,
She's certified diva.
Which, I mean, let's be honest, Nancy had once been that young, hot, scantily clad, like ring chick, right? So, I mean, she kind of knows how that world works. So, yeah, and I'm sure she felt insecure. She's older. She's had a child. Like, she's not 20 anymore,
Well, this is a cruel thing for him to do.
This is her husband. So, it's very hurtful. He would take these phone calls from the alleged girlfriend, like in front of Nancy. I mean, just was being a dick.
God, I wish I would do that shit in front of you.
I would be like, please tell her to come get you.
No, that bitch would hear some shit happening.
I'm going to pack your shit up and throw it outside. Nancy would send texts to Chris that would say things like, I will not accept the steroid roller coaster ride of emotional abuse. Nancy even blamed Benoit for her own abuse of drugs and alcohol. Benoit would make comments to people like you just mentioned, these guys who make their money and walk away and are like, no, I'm going to go spend time with my family now. He would talk to some of those guys and say, like, how do you walk away from wrestling? And he would ask questions like, well, how are you going to do that? Or how's that work? And then he would tell them, like, I just don't even know how to do that. Around this time, Chris purchased a life insurance policy and made his ex-wife and his son and daughter in Canada the beneficiaries of this policy.
That's weird.
When Nancy found out about it, she was upset and demanded that he change the policy to make, her Daniel the beneficiaries.
Well, or make everyone at least, you know what I mean? I mean, that would hurt my feelings.
Chris refused. Right? And because of this, they had a really violent altercation. Chris was seeing Dr. Phil Aston in Carrollton, Georgia. Aston was the guy who was prescribing these copious amounts of steroids and pain pills to Chris and Nancy. From May 30th to June 19th of 2007, Nancy was prescribed 360 hydrocodone pills.
From May to June? Was that a couple of months?
That's not even a month. May 30th to June 19th. That's like just a little over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
In Chris's last days, he had taken 278 of 360 Lorset tablets, which is, I guess, like a hydrocodone type of pill, some kind of pain pill. Nancy was taking about 11 pain pills per day. Between Wednesday, June 20th and Friday, June 22nd, Chris had taken 35 pain pills in 2 days. And I believe it was on Thursday, the 21st, that Chris and Nancy had gone to see Dr. Aston and had gotten refills of their medications.
Yeah, I need another 1,000 pills, Doc.
Chris and Nancy were spending their days in a heavy drug stupor that was amplified by alcohol.
See, the doctors take a Hippocratic oath, do no harm. And that's in direct violation to that, prescribing these people. He knows damn well that nobody should consume pain pills to this degree.
And in 2006, Nancy had the similar neck surgery that Chris had, where she had to have the fusion. So, I guess they're milking that for all it's worth to get pain pills. On Friday, June 22nd, Chris and his son Daniel were seen grilling at the house. Sometime on Friday night, Chris killed his wife Nancy in the bonus room of their Georgia home. Nancy's arms would be found bound with coaxial cables and her feet duct taped. Chris had taken a phone cord, placed it around his wife's neck, and buried his knee into her back while he strangled her to death.
Jesus.
A balled up sock would later be found in the kitchen trash can, soaked and dried. Well, it was soaked, but, dried in blood. It was believed to be used as a makeshift gag that he had probably placed in her mouth. Let's see. Then he wrapped her in a blanket and placed a Bible next to her body and then just left her in this bonus room. Daniel's exact time of death is unknown, But it seems like after he murdered his wife, he woke Daniel up and gave the child Xanax. Chris Benoit suffocated the 7-year-old with his bare hands. The child had some unusual wounds, indicating that it was likely Benoit had used a trademark wrestling submission hold known as the crippler crossface on the boy.
Jesus.
Daniel was killed in his bedroom, and a Bible had been placed next to his body. On Saturday, June 23rd, Chavo Guerrero received a voicemail from Chris Benoit stating that Daniel and Nancy had food poisoning and that he was going to be late for Saturday night's event in Beaumont, Texas. When Chavo returned the phone call to Benoit, he noted his friend sounded tired and groggy. Chavo was concerned, like he just felt like something wasn't right, and he called Chris back about 12 minutes later after they got off the phone. And he left a voicemail asking Benoit to please call him back. When Benoit returned the call, he said he was on the line with Delta Airlines about switching his flight. He also told his friend that everything was fine. He just had a really stressful day dealing with his family's illness, and he was tired and just trying to, work everything out.
Damn, imagine later realizing that he was talking to you after he had killed his son and wife.
Benoit ended this phone call saying, "I love you." Guerrero was worried about Benoit, just the way he sounded kind of off and the way he emphasized, "I love you." Guerrero was troubled by this. Again, he's just, he senses something's not okay with my friend.
Right.
Benoit failed to show up for the Beaumont, Texas event on Saturday night. He left another message on Chavo's voicemail sometime around 3:50 in the morning saying that he would arrive in Houston around 8 a.m. on Sunday. On Sunday, June 24th, 5 text messages were sent to coworkers. This was between 3:51 a.m. and 3:58 a.m. From both Chris and Nancy's cell phones. 4 of the messages were simply Benoit's home address. The 5th message noted that the family's German Shepherds were enclosed in the pool house and that the garage side door was open.
Damn.
Now, Chavo saw that this message was coming in and stuff, but he just didn't really pay attention because he thought, oh, well, he's texting me about picking him up at the airport. So he just sees the text on his phone and then just goes back to sleep, doesn't read the text. However, Benoit was not at the airport on Sunday morning. Benoit also sent that text to a referee named Scott Armstrong. On Monday, the WWE executives arrived in Corpus Christi for WWE Raw. As the hours progressed, Chris Benoit had been, kind of missing in action all weekend. Nobody had really heard from him, so they're concerned. He's missed 2 nights.
Which is probably a big deal.
Is he showing up tonight? They don't know. That's when Chavo Guerrero showed an executive the text messages. The executive was like, "Bro, why didn't you show me this earlier? This is not good." So WWE called the Fayetteville police asking for a welfare check. When an officer arrived at the house, a female neighbor was outside their home. He kind of has a brief conversation with her. At this point, it sounds like the dogs were kind of out in a fenced area running around. So she's like, "Oh, well, I can handle the dogs. I feed them when they're out of town. Don't be afraid. I got the dogs."
She knows the dogs.
Yeah. So she goes in the fence and takes the dogs and puts them in the house or whatever. And then she comes out a few minutes later screaming that Daniel is dead.
Damn.
Inside the home, law enforcement find 3 bodies, and it's a ruled a crime scene. By 4:15, WWE has been notified. It appeared that on the evening of June 24th, Chris Benoit committed suicide after murdering his wife and son. He had used a lat pull-down machine in his home gym, to hang himself, and he had added about 240 pounds of weight to the machine to hang himself.
Okay.
With the cord. He'd wrapped the cord around his neck. And, yeah.
So he made it off. Oh, okay. Made it enough weight to offset his body so he could hang, I guess.
Well, yeah, so it would snap his neck.
Oh, gosh.
At first, no one knew what to think. On Monday night, the WWE paid tribute to Benoit with a 3-hour special. It was not until the last hour of the program that reports began appearing that Chris, Nancy, and Daniel had all died on different days over the weekend, and police were not looking at any suspects. The following Tuesday, Vince McMahon made a statement recognizing the tribute show was premature in wake of the news that Benoit had murdered his family and committed suicide. Benoit's name was scrubbed from the WWE website and has never been mentioned again. The WWE distanced itself from Chris Benoit. It was determined that Benoit had looked up an Old Testament Bible verse related to Elijah about resurrecting his dead son, likely just before he had hung himself.
I mean, this is all very, very disturbing.
Some friends and family thought it was a complete shock, while others weren't that surprised. Dave Pinzer, who had been friends with the couple and had lived nearby, said when he heard the news, he didn't doubt in his mind that it was a double murder and suicide, but he thought it could have been either parent capable of killing based on the back and forth dysfunction of Chris and Nancy.
Damn.
So he wasn't surprised by it, but he was just like, well, which one did it? Because he thought they both were capable.
So he's heard and seen some things.
Well, he had seen the couple engage in awkward public fights and said that it seemed to worsen after the death of their friend in 2006, Johnny Grunge. Grunge had operated as a mediator between the couple, and then once he was gone, they didn't really have anybody to help. Quickly, the press blamed steroid use or roid rage for the murder-suicide. The WWE underwent government investigation regarding their talent wellness policy. Benoit had passed drug tests with flying colors, but using a 10-month supply in a single month, like, how's that work?
Yeah, that's because they're either telling him when the tests are going to be and he's flushing out, or they're just straight up, replacing the urine with someone else's sample.
It was noted that in March of 2006, 40% of wrestlers had tested positive for steroid use. At the time of the Benoit incident, chronic traumatic encephalopathy,
that's right,
known as CTE, was being researched. CTE was prevalent in former NFL players. Brain analysis post-mortem showed severe damage to the brain, and it was the kind only previously seen in Alzheimer's or dementia patients. Like, the brain damage was so severe from these guys who played this gridiron football.
Yeah, one of the famous deaths in the NFL was Junior Seau, and he shot himself in the chest, and had left a note basically, or so they could study his brain. I mean,
yeah,
to even be in that mindset, it's almost like it drives them crazy.
Well, like when Chris Benoit's brain was studied, it was determined that he had the brain of an 85-year-old dementia patient at the time of his death.
So he wasn't. I'm not making excuses by any means, because I think he had. He probably knew something was happening. He probably had many times he could have reached out for help, and he didn't, unfortunately. And it's it sounds like his wife had her own issues. But when this went down, he probably wasn't in his right mind. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what a lot of people say. And I think
that doesn't make it okay.
Well, yeah, and there's kind of this divide, I think, among his friends and family and the wrestling community. I mean, you've mentioned Benoit. That's a tricky subject. People are very emotional when have a very emotional, visceral reaction to the conversation. But again, it's like, people recognize that, like, he was a really talented wrestler. Like, there's no denying that the guy was probably one of the most skilled wrestlers to ever live. The hardest working guy, good dad. I mean, to the end, people say he was really an excellent father, despite what he did to his son. But they're also like, he was very troubled and did this horrible thing. And so, like, we don't want to honor or pay tribute to him as this wrestler because of what he did in his personal life was just so horrible.
Right. Well, and I'm sure you got some people like, oh, he was a monster. He killed his family.
Yep.
And then I'm sure the other half's like, he had this thing happened to him.
Yeah.
That made him do this to his family. You know what I mean? That's the difference.
Yeah, but in the end, I think you have to really, it boils down to some kind of personal responsibility and accountability. And he did these things for years, knowing good and damn well the consequences, that he could fuck himself up.
He'd lost 14 friends.
Getting brain damage.
Colleagues.
It's deaths all around him. Loses his best friend. Because of the shit they're doing, and then he continues to do it. He continues taking the steroids. He continues taking even more steroids. He's eating pain pills. It's like very self-destructive.
Right.
And then in the end, it's like he's done all this for the love of this sport, for wrestling, and now wrestling disowns him. And he's not even he's not even remembered, or
they won't even speak.
They don't even want to associate with them.
No, and even if they did, it would be nothing but a brief pause, and it would crank right along without you. They'll wash the blood off the floor, and they keep moving.
Well, one of my resources was Dark Side of the Ring, which is a Vice series. It's season 2, episode 1 and 2 on Chris Benoit. And during, these 2 episodes, they interviewed his son, David. His surviving son.
Oh, the ones that lived in Canada.
Yeah, and David's he really struggles because he's like, my dad was awesome. My dad was my hero, and my dad was so good to me. And how Nancy, I wasn't her stepson. She called me her son. She treated me like her son. Like, they were just amazing parents, and they were so awesome to me. And that it's just so hard for him to even think that his dad could do this to one of his moms and his little brother.
Half-brother,
yeah. But he says, that Vince McMahon, nobody from the WWE reached out to his family after this tragedy, except I think he said Chris Jericho and Dean Malenko were the only people who reached out and said, we're sorry, that Vince McMahon, they all just basically washed their hands of this family.
I mean, and that's
which I think is
dirty,
fucking horrible.
No, it is, because even privately, it didn't have to be public. Privately, they could have, hey, what can we help, or we're sorry, blah blah.
Can we help with
that.
Funeral expenses?
But what
can we help pay for some counseling or something? They could have done something. Even just send a fucking card to say, hey, we're sorry this happened.
All they were doing was damage control. They didn't want to have the conversation about all the deaths, because it'd been building and building with all these other deaths. Guerrero's death, sudden death, was a big one too. And then this tragedy like this, even more sensational. This kind of broke into the public sphere, I think, more so than some of the other deaths. They were just concerned about their corporation and their brand.
My other resources for today, a book called Ring of Hell, the story of Chris Benoit and the fall of the pro wrestling industry. And then another book called Dungeon of Death, Chris Benoit and the Hart Family Curse. Damn. And then, of course, there's a ton of newspaper articles, because this is a fairly modern case.
Right.
2007. So, of course, there's a lot of information out there.
Well, I got to say, I learned a lot. Thank you for all the backstory.
Well, I thought, I think we all know what happened. I mean, the crime, it's been in the news. It's pretty recent. I think a lot of people know the story. But for me, and I think most of us, you don't really know, how he got there.
Right.
What brought him to this point. And the tumultuous relationship between he and his wife, the drug use, and just his sheer obsession with wrestling.
Yeah, at all costs.
From a young age, to just be to have this tunnel vision and be willing to do whatever it takes, even if it means sacrificing your life, your body, your soul, for this love of wrestling.
Well, I don't.
It's a lot.
No, it's not. That's being dedicated is one thing, but at this cost. And sacrificing all this, nothing's worth that.
No.
Fame, fortune, acclaim, nothing. Oh my gosh.
Well, he will live in infamy and not for his flying headbutt
Shit.
or his crippling, the crippler. The crippler is what it was, the crippling crippler.
Jesus.
All right, Dylan, thank you for sitting down with me today to discuss the Benoit family tragedy.
Thank you too, and hug your loved ones close. And if you are having like issues that scare you and all that, reach out for help.
Well, and if you can avoid, getting like repeated head injuries, that's probably a good thing too.
Well, don't have repeated concussions.
You're
and
not a crash test dummy.
Follow doctor's advice.
You're a human person, and you're just made out of meat
yeah.
and bones. So, like, don't be out there, performing jackass type of antics and flying around a ring.
Protect your meat sacks.
Jumping on your head.
We all know about head injuries.
Stop landing on your heads.
Head injuries and violence and killers. Don't do it.
Yeah, it's not a good mix.
And we hope this podcast finds you happy, healthy, and fed.
Do we, Dylan? Do we?
All right.
Bye.
Bye.